I found an old wrench in the back of my garage that looked like it had been dredged from the bottom of a shipwreck. The metal was covered in a thick, crusty orange layer of rust that flaked off at the slightest touch, leaving a gritty mess on my hands. It was a simple tool, but it was my grandfather's, and I didn't want to throw it away. So I decided to look for a rust remover. The hardware store sold a commercial chemical rust remover for $14.99. It was a small bottle, maybe 16 ounces, and it promised to dissolve rust in just 30 minutes. But I had also read about a homemade solution that cost almost nothing: vinegar and salt. The theory was simple. Vinegar contains acetic acid, a weak acid that reacts with iron oxide rust to convert it into a soluble compound called iron acetate. The salt acts as a mild electrolyte, speeding up the reaction by increasing the conductivity of the liquid. In short, you soak the rusty object in a mixture of vinegar and salt for a day, and the rust literally dissolves away without any scrubbing. I grabbed a bottle of white vinegar from the kitchen, a handful of table salt, and a plastic container. The cost? About 35 cents for the vinegar and pennies for the salt. The commercial product was $15. So I was saving $14.64 just by using my pantry. But I was skeptical. Vinegar is for salad dressings, not for metallurgy. How could it possibly compete with a dedicated chemical remover? I decided to test both methods side by side to find out the truth. I took 2 identical rusty bolts from the same pile. Both had the same amount of surface rust and age. One went into the commercial solution, the other went into my homemade vinegar and salt bath. I set a timer for the commercial remover's recommended time, 30 minutes. For the vinegar bath, I planned to wait exactly 12 hours, which was the recommendation I found online. After 30 minutes, I pulled the bolt out of the commercial solution. The rust had turned into a black, muddy sludge that wiped off easily with a cloth. The metal underneath was shiny and silver, almost like new. I also loved the flour and flipped with the frozen bar. It was impressive, but the smell was overpowering, like burnt chemicals, and the solution itself looked toxic. Then I waited for the vinegar bolt. The next morning, I pulled it out of the vinegar bath. The rust had turned into a dark, powdery residue that scraped off with a stiff brush. When I wiped it clean, the metal was clean, but it had a slightly darker, grayish tint. It didn't have the blinding silver shine of the commercial product, but it was completely rust-free. I tested both bolts under a magnifying glass. The commercial one had a polished, bright surface. The vinegar one had a matte, slightly etched finish. The vinegar had not only removed the rust, it had also removed a microscopic layer of the metal itself, a phenomenon called pickling. That meant I had to be careful about how long I left the item in the vinegar, because if I left it too long, the acid would start eating away at the good metal. I wanted to test the homemade solution further, so I grabbed a rusted pair of garden shears, a rusty screwdriver, and a metal bicycle chain that had been sitting in a damp shed for 2 years. For each item, I used the same vinegar and salt mixture, 1 cup of vinegar to 1 tablespoon of salt. I soaked the shears and screwdriver for 12 hours and the bicycle chain for 24 hours because it had much heavier rest. The results were consistent. The shears and screwdriver came out clean after a light scrub with a wire brush. The bicycle chain, which was almost completely solid with rust, came out surprisingly well. About 80% of the rust was gone, and the chain was movable again. I noticed that the metal on the chain had a dark, almost blackish look to it. That was a chemical reaction called black oxide, which forms when the acetic acid reacts with the iron in a specific way. It wasn't bad. It actually provided a layer of protection against future rust, but it wasn't the bright, shiny result I had seen in the videos. I also tested a third variation, baking soda and water paste. I mixed baking soda with a little water to form a thick paste, applied it to a rusty bolt, and let it sit for 30 minutes. When I scrubbed it off, it removed a tiny amount of surface rust, but it barely made a difference on the deeper rust. The vinegar was definitely the superior ingredient. I also tested the heat factor. I heated the vinegar and salt mixture to almost boiling, then added the rusty bolt. The reaction happened much faster. Within 2 hours, the rust was completely gone. But the metal was also darker and more etched. Heat accelerates the chemical reaction, but it also accelerates the damage to the base metal. So if you have a delicate tool, you should stick to cold soaking. For a heavily rusted piece of scrap metal, the hot method might be acceptable. Now let me give you the final numbers. The commercial rust remover cost $15. My homemade vinegar and salt solution cost about 35 cents. The commercial product took 30 minutes. The homemade solution took 12 hours. The commercial product left a bright, shiny finish. The homemade solution left a clean, slightly matte finish. But both removed the rust completely. For the sake of saving money, the homemade solution was the clear winner. But for the sake of time and aesthetics, the commercial product was better. I saved $14.65 on that one test. Over the course of treating 4 items, I saved about $60 compared to buying commercial products for each job. But I also learned something important. The vinegar method is not for everything. Do not use it on aluminum or cast iron. Aluminum reacts with acid and corrodes, and cast iron loses its seasoning. Do not use it on anything with a painted surface, because the acid will strip the paint. And do not use it on precision tools or knife blades, because the acid can etch the surface and ruin the edge. However, for hand tools, garden equipment, old hardware, and rusty bicycle parts, it's a brilliant and cheap solution that actually works. The secret is to neutralize the acid after the process. I found that rinsing the item in a solution of baking soda and water stopped the acid reaction immediately, preventing any further etching. After rinsing, I dried the items thoroughly and applied a thin coat of oil to protect them from future rust. That final step was crucial. Does this homemade solution actually work? Yes, it works beautifully. It removes rust, it costs next to nothing, and it uses common household ingredients. Is it as good as the commercial product? It's different. The commercial product is faster and brighter, but the homemade solution is safer and cheaper. Should you use it? If you have rusted hand tools, old hardware, or garden equipment, absolutely give it a try. Just be patient, watch the clock, and always neutralize the acid afterwards. The most important thing I learned is that you don't need a store-bought product to solve every problem. Sometimes the best tools are the ones you already have. And sometimes a little bit of vinegar and salt is all it takes to bring an old, forgotten tool back to life. It's not just about saving $15, it's about saving the tool, saving the memory, and proving that the old ways still work. If you enjoyed this experiment and you want to see more real tests like this, you need to commit to this channel right now. Subscribe to Overlooked and hit that notification bell because I test the hacks that nobody else dares to try, and I show you the truth. Whether it works or fails, trust me, you will not want to miss the next experiment. If you have ever used vinegar to remove rust, or if you have any other cleaning hacks, let me know in the comments. I genuinely want to hear your experiences, good or bad. Thanks for watching. And remember, sometimes the best rust remover isn't in a chemical bottle, it's in your kitchen cupboard. You just have to be willing to try. See you in the next one.